The format for this meeting is a 10-minute speaker, our secretary's announcement, a coffee break, a snack break, and our main speaker. Our first speaker tonight is Derek.
Derek Newton, alcoholic. My sobriety date is September 24th, 2019. My sponsor is John Brown, and my home group is the Seal Beach Speaker Meeting on Monday nights. And I'm an alcoholic, and I'm grateful to be standing in front of you today. I know my family's grateful that I'm here. There are many times in my life that I should have been dead because of my decisions in alcohol, and because of this program. My relationships with them today are amazing. I started off drinking when I was like 14. My parents had went out for like the first time my sister and I were home alone. I was a late bloomer. I got beat up a lot when I was a kid. I was smaller than the other kids. And, at 14, I went to the cabinet and, they were out on a date night, and it was Tanqueray. And I drank that, and oh my God, my life changed. Like the fear that I had inside of me just melted, and I found my first love was alcohol. They came home that night and found me, and I remember my mom was just like, "Oh my God, he's drunk." And all the times before when I get in trouble, it was like I had fear inside of me, and at that moment I had no fear. Like it was gone, and I could not wait to do it again. At 18, my dad was like fed up with me because I drank as often as I could, and I got in trouble every time I did. And he's like, "You're going in the Army." I was like, "Can we talk about this?" He's like, "No." I was like, "All right." So I enlisted in the Army, and 4 days after my 19th birthday, I went to basic, and I ended up in Germany for my first duty station. And like at 19 years old, I fell in love. Like, there was no drinking age over there at the time, and it was just amazing. I caught my first deployment to Bosnia, March of the following year, in 98. When alcohol is removed from me, I do pretty well, but it takes an outside force. It takes a power greater than myself to keep me from doing that. And at the time, it was the Army, and went to Bosnia for 9 months and did really well. Came back and we're home for a couple months, and we caught orders to go to Kosovo in '99. And during that time, training and went to that deployment and got back, and I dove into alcoholism. I had experiences over there that I just didn't know how to comprehend or process, and you just it's not something at 20 years old to talk about your feelings, especially being in that position. And I dove into alcohol and really just wanted to die. And I tried to kill myself at Fort Benning in 2000. And I got discharged from the Army and went back home, and I couldn't stay away from it. My family did an intervention in 2001, and it was, my mom's like, "You're going either to the Wilderness Treatment Center in Montana, or you're going to Long Beach, California." And I was like, I didn't care. I just wanted to die, and I just didn't want to live, but I didn't want to try and kill myself again. I failed the first time, and I just couldn't go through that again. So I ended up in Long Beach, and I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous in Germany at 20. And then when I went back home, I was introduced again because I got arrested for public intoxication, and I was sentenced to Alcoholics Anonymous again. And I would come in here, and you guys would talk about God. I didn't believe in God, and you talked about surrender. I couldn't comprehend the word surrender. And I ended up in Long Beach, and they took me to AA again. I was like, "Oh my God, are you serious?" Like, you people were happy, and I just didn't have anything to be happy about, and I wasn't willing to listen to anybody. I created this person through the years to keep you away, to keep you from hurting me. And alcohol helped with that, and then my aggression and my anger helped keep you away from me. And you people were happy, and I couldn't get it. But something happened. I saw you guys were happy, and I started going to AA meetings. I got out of that rehab, and I moved in with John's one of his first sponsors, Alan. And Alan introduced me to John, it would have been, another 8 years before I asked him to sponsor me. But I relapsed, but then in 2004, March 30, 2004, I got sober again after, trying to drink like a gentleman. It doesn't work if you're an alcoholic. But, I wasn't willing to do these steps or do the work or be honest with somebody else. And I just didn't drink. I didn't drink, and I went to meetings until I got tired of going to meetings, and then I just didn't drink. And I stayed sober for 12 years without taking a drink. And, there's that moment that they talk about in the book, when you have no mental defense against that first drink. And I went through a divorce, and, I had a daughter that was 4 years old. And, going through that divorce, having to live away from her was some of the worst pain I've ever felt. And, and I picked up a drink, man, knowing that I end up in jail, I end up in institutions, and I end up in hospitals when I drink. It's the one thing that I know is going to work in that moment. In that moment, it's going to work. I know it will. I can control it this time. And, September 22nd, 2019, I had given up custody of my daughter so I could drink. And September 22nd, I was drinking alone in my room, in my apartment. I turned on this stupid movie called A Star is Born with Bradley Cooper. Never should have done that. I watched this movie, man, and I drank my whiskey, and I fucking saw myself for the first time, right? And I knew what the end result was going to be. I was going to be dead. The end result was me being dead. And I knew that Alcoholics Anonymous worked, man. So on September 23rd, I called John. He's like, go to detox and get some help. I said, okay. So I went to the VA. They sent me to detox for 10 days. I came out of that detox. And what I did on that day was I surrendered, right? I couldn't fathom surrender. I've been on the other side of it, taking people surrender, taking them to a processing center. They've lost their freedom, right? I can't see how a surrender is going to save my life. And the ultimate surrender for me was I started listening to somebody else beside myself on September 24th, 2019. We started working the steps. And it was the most painful process I've ever been through, for 10 years. I asked John, I think around 2009, to be my sponsor. He'd tell me the truth, and I'd leave mad, right? Not being able to see the truth about myself. And going through those steps and seeing the truth about myself being one of the most painful things I've ever felt was one of the most freeing things I've ever felt. Getting to the other side of that, right? I had a couple years, and the one thing I didn't do was sponsor other guys or really do the whole triangle, right? I was working an angle. I just heard this last week. It was, not working all three sides of the triangle was just one angle. I was working an angle, and I was, and I started doing whatever he said, man, and we got through the steps, and I started sponsoring another guy. And, I've had like 5 guys ask me to sponsor them. I've got one that does the work, that calls me, and, I get to watch his life change right before my eyes. He calls me like I used to call John, and because I've done the work, I can transmit something, and I don't know where the words come from sometimes, right? He asks me about things he's going through, and I have a solution, right? And if I don't have a solution, I get to talk to John. And if John doesn't have a solution, he gets to talk to his sponsor. And this thing, I don't care how it works. I know that if you're an alcoholic, congratulations on the new person. If you're an alcoholic, man, this program will save your life, right? My family has their son back. The relationships I've been able to build today because of this program with my family is just amazing, and with other people. That daughter that I gave up custody of, it took 2 years, and I got 50% custody back of her. And right after I got custody back of her, I was able to start homeschooling her because she was, she wasn't doing well in school. And, I homeschooled her for 18 months and found out there was a little more that she needed, and was able to put her back into school. And, I'm here tonight because this program saved my life, and whatever I can do to repay Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever is asked of me, I do today. Because I know through this process that I'm happy, right? I do this, and John and I recently talked about this. We're going through Drop the Rock right now. And, I try to drive to his office once a week and have lunch, and every time we get into to Drop the Rock, there's some way that our lives are correlated with the reading that we do that day. So I keep doing the work because, when I wake up in the morning, like, I'm happy. Like, I say a prayer. I've really dove in the last 2 years into prayer and meditation. They've talked about it. Number 12, sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact, right? I created a contact with God through doing the steps, and I improved that by prayer and meditation. And I've really, really dove into the meditation part of it. And, it's amazing what happens when, I just sit there and just shut my head off for 15 minutes. I just close my eyes, and, this rat race that was going on in my head for so many years, calling me so many names, telling me that I'm so much stuff, it's, that's not there anymore. I have a peace today that, I never thought possible prior to doing the steps, and that I'm grateful for through doing the steps. So I don't know how much time I got left, buddy, but
Yeah, you're around a couple of minutes.
thank you for being here tonight. If you take a chip or a birthday tonight, happy birthday, and, thanks for being here.
All right. So I'm going to lead us in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Now our main speaker will share his/her experience, strength, and hope with us. Please join me in welcoming John B. from Fullerton.
Thank you. My name is John Brown, and I'm an alcoholic. And I want to thank Alan for asking me to come and share my experience, strength, and hope. I'd like to thank Derek for a great 10 minutes. And I've been part of Derek's life for a long time. And, one of the joys he talked about was seeing somebody that you've been working with or even being around when the lights come on and life starts to change. And what that means is, there's a switch in all of us that we've been around here long enough where we go from being told I need to go to meetings to having to go to meetings to wanting to go to meetings. There's this process of surrender as we go along in our lives. And when we get to the point where we want to go to meetings, it's because we've done some of the work around here. And what that work is really is getting that dirt between you and God away so you can have a relationship with something higher power, bigger than yourself. And it's one of the true pieces of this puzzle that allows us to stick around here. And you did a great job explaining that today. I'd like to welcome anybody that's new or anybody that has, or who's just coming back to Alcoholics Anonymous, has been away. Happy birthday to the birthday guys. I've been sober since March 9th, 1995. And, I'm grateful for that. Alcohol, the person that's sitting here today, standing in front of you, is not the same person that when I walked into the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous changed me in ways that I could have never imagined. And part of that was being able to get up here and tell you what's going on in my heart and my head. Being able to tell the truth, something that took me many, many years to do. I was incapable of telling the truth. My perception of the world, my perception of how I lived my life, how my life was completely different when I came into the rooms here than it is today. And what's happened in my life is that I got doses of the truth by people that didn't care about my feelings. They only cared about my sobriety. And that's sponsorship. And I hope that each of you have a sponsor today that's willing to tell you the truth so you can kind of pop that head out of your backsides, because for a long time, my head was so far up there. It was a dark and smelly place for a long time, man. I'm glad you got the visual. When I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous on March 9, 1995, I was going to jail and lost my job. I had a wife that was wanted to kill me because she was so mad. I had a daughter who I loved more than anything in the world that was afraid of me. and I'm still fighting for my right to drink. And that's the insanity about what happens to us if you're an alcoholic. See, Alcoholics Anonymous did something to me that nothing else ever could do. The police departments, school, and marriage. What Alcoholics Anonymous did for me was give me the willingness to want to change. Because I held on to that old belief that I was okay. I held on to that old belief that, I'm not that bad. I held on to the old belief that they're worse than I am, so I can't be an alcoholic. And what I have found in my life that if, there's a lot of people here that are in recovery homes, I have found that, Alcoholics Anonymous works 100% of the time if you're an alcoholic. And what makes you an alcoholic? Well, there's a guy named Mickey, and Mickey used to say, how do you know if you're an alcoholic? Well, he said, if you're a turtle and you walked into the bar and you ordered a drink and you had that drink and you still felt like a turtle, chances are you're not an alcoholic. But if you're a turtle and you take a drink and you think you're an eagle, you're a bloody alcoholic. Because what alcohol does to me, it changes the way I see the world. It changes my perspective. It changes my perception. Changes everything about me. And for a long, long time, I was incapable of admitting to my innermost self what the actual problem was. So I kept going in and out of rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous for a very long time. And I share that because, especially if you're new, that this program works 100% of the time if you have our problem. And it took me a long, long time to admit my innermost self that I had that problem. I grew up in New York City. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and before I got to rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, this is what my story was. I grew up in an alcoholic home. Both parents were alcoholics. There was nothing but chaos, fighting. There was never enough food. There was never enough of anything. I spent most of my life being a victim and using that as an excuse to behave the way I wanted to behave. And when I got to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and I sat down with a sponsor and I started to give him that sad story, that sob story that I carried with me for 35 years of my life, he stopped me and said, John, did you ever think about what your parents had to go through raising you? And I said, no. He said, well, if I was your father, I'd be drinking too, because what I had to do, what I have done to those parents was incredible. I started drinking when I was about 13 or 14 years old. And, I always had this chip on my shoulder. I had this angst, this uncomfortableness. It was an irritability. I was discontent. And I didn't know how to articulate that. I didn't know that those words even existed when I was growing up in the Bronx. And a drink and a drug was the only thing that kind of settled that down. I went to Catholic school. And I will say, what I was starting to say in the beginning was, my perception of how I was raised with 2 alcoholic parents. But, those 2 alcoholic parents worked 2 jobs for me to go to Catholic school. And those alcoholic parents worked 2 jobs to make sure that I had new shoes every year and a new uniform. And those alcoholic parents had to feed 5 kids in a very tough time during the 60s and 70s where things were really tough. And, being the selfish and self-centered guy that I was, I couldn't see any of that for most of my life. All I can do is see the way that I felt and blamed it on somebody else. And I can assure you, you're probably sitting here and you probably have blamed people for how you feel. Most of that time I didn't know that it was my responsibility. I didn't know that I had a choice on how I felt and what I did. I defaulted for so many years into a way of thinking and a way of life that's all I knew. And being in Alcoholics Anonymous, they have this thing called a design for living, where you have a design for life, where you can make and choose how you live your life, that you don't have to default back to that easy way out all the time. But I'm a young man at 14 and 15 years old, and none of this it makes sense to me, and none of it was ever brought to my attention. At 15, I'm in Catholic school with a crew cut and uniform. By the time I was 16 years old, I have hair down on my shoulders. I'm getting arrested on a regular basis. I got kicked out of 3 high schools, and I didn't care anymore. Each and every one of us has a moment in our lives where we became defiant, where we stopped caring about the consequences of our behavior, where we stopped caring about, what other people thought. And mine was at 15 and a half years old. I stopped caring. The noise in the house was getting louder. The uncomfortableness in my own skin was getting stronger. And I needed a relief, and that relief was through drugs and drinking. And I like to do special effects with my drinking. First it starts with a little weed, and I like to do some hallucinogenics. I like to do whatever I can to make me feel different. And by 16 years old, I'm drinking and drugging on a daily basis. I'm getting arrested on a weekly basis for petty thefts and different types of things. And there was no outlook to what my life would look like. So I was raised to survive. I was raised to take care of myself. I was raised just to deal in the moment and not worry about anybody else but myself. And that's a pretty lonely life to live. It's a pretty lonely life when all you can think about is yourself. At 17, I met a gal, and which is what we do here, because we're always looking for somebody to make us feel better. See, that hole that's inside of us, we're always trying to fill it with things from the outside. Sex, gambling, money, sports, whatever it is that you're trying to fill inside that hole to make you feel better. And I met this gal, and we hit it off really well. And by the time she was, we were together about a year, she got pregnant. And about 5 months into that pregnancy, she said, John, I think you have a drug and drinking problem. Will you go to Alcoholics Anonymous? Now I'm 18 years old now. And I told her, yeah, I would go. I would do anything for her. And I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was like almost 18 and a half years old. And I walked in, it's a bunch of old Irish guys with big red noses and white hair, and they read how it worked. And in the middle of how it worked, I gave them the finger and I ran out. I said, there was no effing way I'm an alcoholic. And I said it out loud, and I walked out, and I believed it. See, I kept comparing what alcoholism looked like in my life. See, father was a drunk, my mother was a drunk, my uncles were drinkers, everybody was a drinker. And I looked at myself, and I knew there was things going on in my life, but I couldn't admit to my innermost self that that was the problem. In fact, that was my solution. If you took that away from me, I wouldn't know how to cope with life. And 2 weeks before that baby was going to be born, she came to me and said, what I remember her saying, or what I believe she said, and again, this is just my perception and my story, is that you'll be an unfit father, and we're giving the baby up for adoption. And I was shocked, and I didn't know how to respond. And I will tell you about this perception that I've had for most of my life. See, what I remember about that so many years ago was, how can you do this to me? How can she do this to me? And through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and taking these steps in good sponsorship, what actually happened was she wanted me to get sober, and I didn't know how to get sober. Then her father wanted to help me, but I had this false sense of pride. You see, I don't need your help. I don't need anybody. I'm going to do this. I'm going to take care of my family. Now I'm making like $120 a week, living in an apartment with 5 people, and there was probably no real way that I was going to help that family. And my false sense of pride, that pride that kills us, wouldn't allow me to ask for help. And see, I'm 19 years old, and I can't see that. What I see is just, how can she be doing this to me, blaming somebody else for how I feel. That baby got born, and I got to hold that child for 3 days. And on the last day, I went to that WIRA to say goodbye to that baby. She was asleep, and the tears are rolling down my face, and I didn't know how to put into words how I felt that day until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, where you said incomprehensible demoralization. And for the very first time, I actually was able to put words to those feelings. And as I was saying goodbye, that baby was sound asleep, and she woke up like she heard me, and she started crying, and it was like somebody just beat the hell out of me. See, for most of my life, I kept telling you what alcohol did for me. It made me feel better. It made me happy, blah, blah, blah. I never took a look at what it took away from me. See, when you're 18 years old and you're 20 years old, you can't see what alcohol is taking away from you. You can't see the pain that you're causing your family. You can't see the isolation that you're causing yourself. And you can't see the people that are dying around you, because that's what happened to all of us. We can't see that. All we can see is we just need to feel better. And that's what I needed to do. I needed to feel better. Anyway, for a long story short, that was a really painful time in my life. I'm 19 years old, and me and the gal, it was really tough. I will tell you that 43 years later, which was about 2 months ago, I found her on Facebook for the first time, and I got to send an amends to that woman to clean up my wreckage. You know, it took a long time to find her. See, God works in funny ways. You know, I was incapable of seeing that for a long time. And 43 years later, because my job here is to clean up the wreckage of my past and to do whatever it takes, I did that. I knew I didn't expect a response. But I said this amends to her, and I told her how brave and courageous she was to make a decision like that for the best interest of her and that baby. And that my false sense of pride and that my foolishness and my drinking caused her to make that decision. And that was a very painful thing to do, but I don't want to drink today, and I'm willing to go to any lengths to get it. But back then, you know, I'm a victim. And so I get this job, and they had a West Coast office, and, you know, back in my day, we didn't have cell phones. So there was no sexting or texting. There was no dick pics going around town. I know you all did it. I know you're on your phones. If you wanted to get laid, you had to do it the old-fashioned way. You had to talk your way into it. All right? You had to give good phone, right? And I gave good phone. And I met this girl in California, and I'm talking to her, and I'm giving her good phone, and she's giving me good phone. And next thing you know, a picture comes back, and this blonde hair, blue eyes, holding a rose. I go home and take a Polaroid out and take an action picture and send it to her, and now we're talking a little bit more. And you know, all this time I'm still drinking and drugging because, you know, what I've had to do in my whole life was push those feelings down. I don't know how to tell you how I feel. I don't know how to tell you what's on my mind. I don't know how to tell you that I'm hurt or that I'm sad. I'm a big tough guy from New York. I'm keeping it all inside. And I'm still getting in trouble. And, you know, I got arrested one more time, and judge says, you know, Mr. Brown, I'm sick and tired of seeing you. If I see you again, you're going away. I said, Your Honor, you're never going to see me again. I'm moving to California. I figured out my problem. The Bronx was my problem. And 2 weeks after my 21st birthday, I bought a one-way ticket to California. I got this picture of my blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl here, and I got one bag here with all my stuff in it, and I'm on the plane, and I'm showing the picture to everybody on the plane that would listen to my crap. I'm drinking on the plane. I'm laughing. And I get off the plane, and some other woman showed up. It wasn't the same woman in the picture. It was just a little bit different. And you know, the truth of the matter is, you know, I often felt in time, was it a blessing or was it a curse? And, you know, at the time, it seemed like it was a curse, but it turned out to be one of the greatest blessings I've ever had in my life. See, I'm 21 years old. I'm in California, and this gal took a chance. And even though she wasn't exactly what I thought she would be, I can certainly tell you I wasn't what she thought I was going to be either. And if it wasn't for her, because of her, I should say, that my whole family dynamic changed, where by me being able to come out here, my whole family followed me out here, and we've been out here ever since. And but me and that gal, we lasted about 7 days. And and I got a job, and I met this girl at the office, and she was fun, and we liked each other, and within like a week, I moved in with her. And you know, I was always looking for somebody to make me feel better. You know, I have this hole inside of me that needs to be filled. I have this hole inside of me that needs to be loved. And yet I don't know how to love you back, but I'm demanding that you love me. You know, I'm a hurt man. You know, I told you at 15 I became this defiant child, and that 15-year-old boy was making all my decisions till I was 50 years old. That boy that wasn't going to let anybody in, that boy that wasn't going to let anybody hurt you, that boy that was always overly sensitive if anything came close to you trying to hurt me. And me and this gal, you know, we hit it off really well, and that Christmas, my mother called and wanted me to come home, and I said, you know, Mom, I'm not coming home. I'm going to San Francisco to meet my girlfriend's parents and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, when I got back from that trip, there was a note on the door, and my mother died. She was 45 years old, and I carried with me a sense of guilt and shame. And that guilt and shame was, if I would have just went home, maybe she would have lived. You see, it's amazing what our minds will tell us. It's amazing what we carry in us with this shame and this guilt that we carry with us. And I carried that shame and guilt for the next 16 years of my life, thinking that if I could have just went home. And, like I said, I'm a victim. I'm always looking for an excuse to change the way I feel. And I will tell you, when I finally sat down and took these steps and brought that up, the sponsor in my life said, John, you're not God. Only God decides when we live and die, not you. And I needed to hear those words. I needed to be reminded that I don't have that power over people, places, or things. But at that time, it was tough. I'm not even in California a year. I go back for 3 months, didn't draw a sober breath. That girl said she loved me. I came back, and something really changed in me. When I saw my mother laying in a coffin, I knew that was the way I was going to die. I knew I was going to die young. I knew I was going to die hard, and something changed in me. And for the next few years, it was tough. And we broke up, and when I went to make my amends to that gal, out of all the amends that I made, and which pretty much everybody said they would forgive me, she was the only one that said she wouldn't. See, we don't understand the pain that we cause people in our lives. We don't understand the damage that we do, because we're just thinking that, I just got to say I'm sorry. Can you imagine if all of you had $1 for every time you said you were sorry to somebody you loved? And what you learn around here is we don't say I'm sorry. What we do is we change our behavior. Because nobody cares that you're sorry anymore. They just want you to change. And you can't really, that's something really hard to grasp when you're young. You don't understand it. Anyway, me and that gal broke up, and I met this other woman who liked to do special effects like me. She was beautiful, liked to drink like I did, and because of time, I'll just say that we dated for 1.5 years, and she got pregnant, and we got married, and Friday nights were our night out. And if you're an alcoholic like me, this is what it sounds like. Hey, honey, where we're going? It's Friday night. She goes, oh, I'm pregnant. I said, oh, yeah, right. I'll be back in a couple hours. And I want you to know that every promise, everything I ever said, I meant. I really thought I'd be back in a couple hours. But when I take a drink, it takes a drink, and off I go. And it doesn't matter, I have a wife at home with a baby. I'm in bars doing things that married men about to have a baby shouldn't be doing, and she's in bars pulling her husband out. And I'm not proud of that. The damage that we did. I started this story the other day. It's kind of embarrassing, but I'm going to share it anyway. I would go, and after work, I'd say, I'll be home, and I'm not getting home till 2:00 in the morning now. And when I get home, I'm trying to be quiet. I have my shoes in my hand, and I'm trying to put the key in the door, and my head keeps banging on the door. Right? That's kind of jackass I am. And she would be waiting for me at 2 a.m. and comes out and starts pounding on me. And so I was out in the bar that one night, and I said, yeah, I'm in trouble. My wife's going to kill me. And he goes, let me tell you what I do with my wife. What? He goes, what I do is I make as much noise as I can. Really? And then I scream, honey, you better be naked because I'm horny as hell. And go try it. So I go home that night, I scream, honey, you better be naked. I'm horny as hell. And I hear these feet going, and I go in the room, and she's like, yes, figured it out. Following week, I do it again. She's having none of that shit with me. And I share that only because at the mindset, I'm 25, 26 years old, and I don't understand the pain that I'm putting people through. I don't understand how my actions are causing my wife to stay up wondering if I'm going to get another drunk driving because I already got one. How much money am I going to spend because I'm already in debt? See, alcohol, alcohol does to me what it changes me into who I want. It doesn't matter what's going on in my life. It doesn't matter I have a big day at work tomorrow. It doesn't matter that my daughter has school tomorrow. When I take a drink, it takes a drink, and I can't explain it. I can't explain it. Anyway, over the course of time, we struggled, and 3 months after my daughter was born, I went into a rehab, like some of you are now, and I went in not because I was an alcoholic, because I thought I had a drug problem, and did my 30 days in a drug rehab, and came out feeling pretty good like we do, exercised a little bit, had a little bit of eating, a little bit of food, raised my hand and spew out whatever BS that they wanted to hear when I was in there. And I'm not even out an hour. I go to the refrigerator, I crack open a beer, take a sip, and look at my wife and say, honey, our problems are over. I'm never going to do drugs again. And I believed it with every fiber of my soul. As I've said countless times here tonight, until you admit to your innermost self that you're an alcoholic, then and only then will the program of Alcoholics Anonymous work for you. And I could not admit to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic. A few months later, my drinking got out of hand, and I decided just for the heat to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I did exactly the opposite of what they told me to do. They told me to sit down and shut up, get a sponsor, listen, take these steps, and Mike, leave me alone. And as Derek talked about being, there's a huge difference between going to meetings and being sober, or not drinking and being sober. Not drinking and not doing any work is just a time bomb. Being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, that you have a sponsor, you're taking these steps, you're actively involved in the program, and then and only then does the program start to take effect on you. And for 1 year, I didn't do any of that. And instead of taking an anniversary, after 1 year, I went home, looked in the mirror, I said, I told you I wasn't an alcoholic. And I stopped going to meetings, and within 3 months, I was out drinking again for the next 7 years. And I want you to know that those 7 years were probably some of the hardest that my family had to go through. A couple of drunk drivings. I put us in debt. I kept losing jobs. See, prior to getting sober, I lost every job I ever had. I was the type of guy that was always known to have potential. You have potential. What is wrong with you, right? And my best answer is leave me alone. Leave me alone. And on March 8th, 1995, is when I had my moment of clarity. I have a pair of handcuffs on me again, and I'm trying to talk my way out of this arrest. And all I kept hearing in my head was the voices of all the people that ever loved me asking me, what's wrong with you? Why can't you ever stop? Why isn't anything ever enough? And my answer to them, leave me alone. This is the way I am. Man, I think about all those times, that's the way I am. I had no idea that was such BS. That wasn't the way I am. That was the way I chose to be. See, when you get sober, you realize we have choices, that we don't have to default back to that way of living. Got to jail. I went to jail that night, and I knew I was going to jail because it was my second drunk driving in 3 years and my third one in 5. And I got out of that jail that night, and I was going in out of rooms of AA just to get the heat off when my wife was giving me crap. And if you're new, if somebody gives you their phone number, keep it, because that phone number just may save your life one day. There's a guy named Alan Rosencrantz, and I called him up. I said, hey, Alan, my name is John Bryan. He goes, I remember you. What do you want? I said, I think I'm an alcoholic. He goes, good. He goes, meet me at my house. And I went to his house, and he told me his story. And there was a guy named Bob Ragland there, and he told me his story. And I told him my story to the best of my ability. And I asked him a question. Well, he asked me a question. Are you willing to go to any lengths to stay sober? And if you guys are new here tonight, or relatively new, and somebody asks you, it is a trick question. Because they really mean, are you willing to go to any lengths? Not the sometimes length, not when I want to lengths, any lengths. And I said, yeah. And he said, John, you got to go to meetings every day no matter what. You have to show up early, you got to stay late, you got to sit up front, and you got to hang out with the winners. He goes, I'll see you tomorrow at 7 a.m. at the morning meeting. I said, Alan, that's a Saturday. I don't wake up till noon. And then he looked at me, and he would point this beautiful nickname on me for a long time. He goes, look, you jackass. You just told me you go to any lengths, and you be there. And that morning, I always showed up at meetings late. And I got there at 7:15, and that guy, Bob Ragland, got up in the middle of the meeting and said, hey, John, come sit next to me. And I don't know how we sometimes forget how the littlest gestures for newcomers make a huge difference with them staying and keeping around here. But that little gesture made a huge difference for me. And I sat next to that man for the next 5 years till he passed away. And my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous started. You know, I was dealing with getting fired, going to jail. My daughter was afraid of me. My wife was mad at me. And you guys just said, just keep coming back. It's going to get better. And, you know, when you're going through those tough times, you know, it's really hard to fathom that just keep coming back to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous will change your life. Because we're looking for instant solution. We're a generation that has had instant gratification our whole life. And there isn't instant gratification in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is a process of churning over who we were to what we're able to do to become what we need to be. When you change your thinking, you change your actions, and when you change your actions, you change the outcome of your life. And that takes some time. You can't put an old head on a young person. I'd love to give you almost 30 years of experience, but I can only share my experience, strength, and hope to give you hope that if you stick in this program long enough, that your life can change and you can become whatever it is you were destined to be in this world. That the life that you've had can be easily changed by just taking some necessary direction from, as Derek said earlier, from somebody else to help you find that relationship with your God of your understanding. But it is a painful process. And I'm sober now. I'm 35 years old, and I'm going to meetings. And I lost the privilege to drive. So I'm a good idea guy. And I figured, my brother was living in Germany, and I figured, hey, you know what? I'm going to become my brother. He won't mind. Call a buddy of mine. I said, I figured out my driving problem. He goes, what's that? I said, I'm going to become my brother. He goes, you better talk to your sponsor. He's going to love this idea. So I called Alan. Alan, I figured out my problem. He goes, yeah, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to become my brother. He goes, really? I go, yeah. He goes, what do you think? He goes, John, when are you going to stop hurting people? And when are you going to start taking responsibility for your action? I go, well, that's a little rough. Stop it, right? He goes, what you're going to do is you're going to get up tomorrow morning. You're going to go to that morning meeting. You're going to raise your hand and you're saying, your name is John Brown and you need help. Now, I would rather everybody in this room punch me in the face before I was going to ask for help that day. See, I had this false sense of pride. I had this false sense of pride my whole life. You see, I didn't realize, I didn't know how to tell you that I never felt that I measured up. I didn't know how to tell you that I didn't think I was worth it. I didn't know how to tell you that, I'm different. That if you really knew who I was, you wouldn't like me. That I needed your approval in my life. See, I was a tough guy. I kept you all the way, so I never had to deal with that. And now you're forcing me to do things that I'm uncomfortable to do. So it was my sponsor. We sat at this table. He was in front of me. His sponsor was next to him. And about 10 to 8, I heard, and I raised my hand. I said, my name is John Brown. I'm an alcoholic. I lost the privilege to drive, and I need somebody to help me drive. And this woman way in the back raised her hand and goes, honey, I'll help you. Now, I don't recommend giving the keys to your brand new car to a crackhead living in a recovery home, but that's what I did. And for the next 2 years, that girl picked me up every morning, took me to a meeting, took me to work, picked me up, took me to a meeting, and took me home. And the only compromise we had was in the morning, I got to listen to classic rock, and on the way home, she got to listen to rap. That was our compromise. And something really started to happen that was really amazing is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous started to work when I got out of the way. She stayed around here for about 12 years, and she decided she wasn't an alcoholic anymore, and God bless her. But I got to stay, and I got to put into practice these principles. My life started. I didn't have a set of principles that I lived by for a long, long time. And what happens is that when we start to take these steps here, and we start to live our lives, our behavior has to change, because they say around here the road starts to narrow. And what that means is that if you don't change your behavior, eventually you're going to pick up that drink again. And I needed to start to change, and I needed to try to become a better man. And my prayer for over and over was, dear God, help me become a better man. And I didn't know what that meant, but that's what I wanted to be. And over the course of time, thanks to cleaning up the wreckage of my life and changing, I became a better man. And I'm grateful for this program. I just want to share a couple of things, what's happening in my life today. And, I had to make those amends. The first amends I had to make was to that mother of mine who's been dead now for 16 years. And instead of talking about her drinking and her dying, I had to talk about what I did, about getting kicked out of school, getting arrested, taking money out of her purse, all the things. And, when you write these amends to somebody that's passed away, it's really painful. And I started writing, Dear Mom, and the tears started flowing. By the time I finished, I was sobbing. And I got to go to, my home group was also the Seal Beach Speakers meeting, and their format is 2 7-minute speakers followed by a main speaker. And I was asked to be one of those 7-minute speakers. And in front of 200 plus people, I got to share what happened, and I started crying on the podium. And when I came down, they put their arms around me and said, John, it's going to be okay. And for the first time, I really felt that maybe it was going to be okay. And I went home that night and I fell asleep, and I slept soundly for the first time. And when I woke up, there was something uniquely different about me. that shame, that guilt, that pain that I carried with me my whole life was gone. I didn't realize how powerful these amends were. And I started to just really, really focus in on how I needed to change. And the amends process was a really big deal. At 2.5 years of sobriety, I started a business. Again, I have a GED, I got a high school job, and I've been fired from every job I ever had, but I always had potential. And and I started this business. And 26 and a half years later, I'm still in business. And I have a great life because of that. I've got to travel all over the world because of my job. I've been to meetings in 30 different countries. Because no matter where I go, I always find out where that meeting is. And I go to that meeting before I start my business to get centered and to get focused, because that's what I was taught to do. Next month, that wife who was really mad at me, we're going to celebrate our 38th wedding anniversary, thanks to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. See, what happened was, I'm getting sober and I'm not home, and after about 3 months, she goes, I wish you'd drink again. At least you were home some nights. And, it was just her not knowing about this process. And then I'm getting sober, and she didn't believe me. So that, the first year, I'm telling my sponsor, I want a divorce. He goes, why do you want a divorce? I said, my wife still don't believe me. 16 months, she still doesn't believe me. He goes, John, do you remember every lie you ever told your wife? I go, of course not. She goes, she does. Remember every broken promise you ever made? I go, oh, no, she does. Just shut up and just keep doing what you're doing. And then we went to marriage counseling, and, my daughter was going to college, and the first person in our family to go to college because of sobriety. And she goes, why are you here? And we both look at each other and said, hey, we don't know why we're still married. We're fighting all the time. It's tough. She goes, look, what I want you to do is go home and ask God to show you why you're still married. And I'm like, I'm paying you $120 to tell me to go home and pray? She goes, go home and pray. So for 2 weeks, dear God, I don't know why I'm married, blah, blah, blah. After 2 weeks, I stopped praying, and we went on our first family vacation in a long time, and we had one of the greatest times of our lives. Came back. We couldn't wait to tell our therapist how great it was, and she goes, oh, so I guess your prayers got answered. I go, what prayer? She goes, didn't you ask God to show you? I said, I did. I was like, wow. And then she said something that really changed our life. She goes, isn't God's plan better than yours? See, when I get out of my own way, when I stop trying to control the outcome of what's going to happen and just do the footwork that I'm supposed to do, the outcome in life is 100% better than I could ever, ever, ever ask for. Ever ask for. And that's why next month we'll be 38 years married, and I'm grateful for her. She's gone through a lot. I used to tell people she's going to heaven, and I'm still working on it, but that's changed a little bit now, so it's all right. That daughter of mine, who was afraid of her dad, it took a little time for her and I to get good. She went to college, came back, and moved right out, and she said we were fine, but I knew we weren't. And at 27, when she was 27, I made another amends to tell her that I knew how tough it must have been growing up in a house that had, yelling and screaming and fighting. And I asked her, what can I do to make it better? And she said, when I'm around you, please don't scream or yell anymore between you and Mom. I said, I won't. And our relationship changed, and 4 years ago, or 6 years ago, I got to walk her down the aisle. 4 years ago, she gave me my first grandson, and 2 years ago, she gave me my second grandson, and I'm a major part of their lives today, thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous. Because what happens in here is that if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to clean up the wreckage of your life, make those amends, and then change your behavior, anything is possible. This father of mine, he was the problem because I grew up hating my father my whole life. I blamed him for the issues in my family. I blamed him for everything. And my first amends to my dad was, hey, Dad, I'm sorry for not being a good son, but you were an asshole as a father. And needless to say, that didn't go too well, right? And about a year later, he went back to New York to visit my brother, and he injured his leg, and it turned gangrene, and the doctor said, look, we got to cut your father's leg off. And I'm not sure if he's going to make it or not. So I called my sponsor. I said, hey, I don't know what to do. He goes, we need to pray for God's will. I go, how do you do that? dear God, whatever your will is, I'll accept. So I got on that plane, and I sat by that man's bedside. They cut his leg off, and he was in a coma with a respirator. First week, all I can say was, dear God, whatever your will is. And second week, they took the respirator out, and he woke up. And a week later, I got to take him home. And in that time frame, something happened between him, me, and God. And he became my dad again. I became his son. And for the next 5 years, we became best friends. When I took him to AA meetings with me, we went to ball games together, we sang songs in the car together. It was the gift that I never even knew I wanted, that I got because of you. My sister called me up and said, hey, your dad was sick last night. Come take him to the doctor. So I pick him up and say, hey, Pop, how you doing? He goes, oh, I'm all right. So we drive him to the doctor. He goes, hey, John. I go, yeah, Dad. He goes, I love you. I go, oh, shit, you must be sick. Let's get out of here, right? And then he looked at me and said, and I'm proud of you. I want you to know that, I waited my whole life for that man to say that. I didn't deserve it, but, for whatever reason, he thought that day I did. And when I pulled him into the emergency room, they took him in, and a minute later, he died. And my memories of my father are not for the first 42 years of my life. My memories of my dad are for the last 5 years, where that healing happened between both of us. Where I got to be a son and he got to be a father, and I carry with that joy. If I got nothing else out of being sober in my life, having that joy between me and him, I can't even ever tell you how it's changed my life. And see, that's the gifts that we get. I am so overpaid. There's a song, and part of the lyric is that God's been good to me, better than he had to be. And that's my story. I'm a 100% byproduct of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is the most important thing in my life today. I do it, I breathe it, I live it, and I get to live a life beyond anything I could have ever imagined as that 16-year-old kid. And the relationship in my life today are great. And I'll share this and I'll sit down. I was, maybe 1 or 2 years sober, and I was having a hard time, and I called my sponsor. I said, hey, Alan, I'm having a hard time. He goes, what's wrong? I said, my wife's not treating me well. My job is really beating me up. He goes, wow, would you like me to come over? I said, wow, yeah, that'll be good. He goes, I'll bring my gun. You can blow your effing brains out, and hung the phone up on me. I'm like, wow, that was rough. Shit, even he's turning on me. He calls me back. He goes, John, I don't care how you feel. I only care what you do. Because if you want to change how you feel, change what you're doing. And if you learn anything about our talk tonight, is it's not in our feelings, it's in our action. Learning how to take the right action is part of this process of recovering and becoming who we're destined to be. And I hope you find it like I had. Thanks for letting me share tonight.